Welcome. This is the Silicon Valley Clean Tech Speaker Series. I greatly appreciate you coming and undertaking the obstacle course to get here. Once you've been here, you'll think it's so easy. And it's actually a nice venue. It's the first time you come, you're like,
thank you for putting the signs out.
The sign that I sent out, if you registered before midnight last night, I sent out detailed directions because it can be tricky finding the way.
Yeah, that was good.
Thank you. So the Silicon Valley Clean Tech Speaker Series is sponsored by the EcoGreen Group. And for this event, it's also sponsored by Foothill College, thanks to our presenter, Mr. Cormia, who helped us get the venue, got permission for us to be able to hold the event here at Foothill College, and we greatly appreciate that. We do the speaker series normally on a monthly basis. At the moment, after this, we don't have a venue lined up. So there may be a little gap as we work at finding a new venue, which I'll also offer that if you can network with your friends, if you know of anybody who has a venue, part of the magic is free. Is part of the way we have charged so little in the past is because we haven't actually paid for the venues that we've used. Is they've been provided to us for free by the organizations who thought what we were doing was worthwhile or had community outreach programs. So for us to keep our prices low, free is the magic price. But I know other organizations, IEEE organizations, etc., were able to hold their meetings at venues. So if you know somebody or if you work for a company that might be willing to sponsor something like this, if you could ask around and let one of us know, that would be very helpful. So if you are on the mailing list, which you should be if you registered for this, you'll get notified of when and where our next event is. We also don't have a speaker lined up at the moment. The speaker we had, it turned out, took a job in another state and won't be able to present on the short term. So if you've got people you would love to hear, feel free to share that with us, and we'll follow up and see if that makes sense for EcoGreen Group to sponsor. Another announcement I wanted to make is if you're following the work on electric automobile chargers, PG&E has a proposal into the PUC about rolling out 25,000 chargers. So this is a controversial issue at the moment. There are people on both sides of the issue, some that think it's going to damage competition and undermine the companies that have been in the charger business. Other people feel like getting PG&E behind having chargers and deploying them will make the rollout of electric vehicles better. So if you have an interest in this, I would recommend that you go to the PUC site and look at what has to be said and see if you want to provide comment. The deadline, I think, is very short, which is tomorrow.
And also, I believe it's correct that they're going to actually charge everybody on their own bills, whether you have an electric car or not.
Correct. As always, PG&E funds all of their projects through their ratepayers, and that's why they go to the PUC is we want to do this, and we want to be able to build this to our ratepayers. So this is great if you drive an electric vehicle. If you don't drive an electric vehicle, you may feel like you're helping something that you may or may not agree with. Pardon? Yes. So I will send out, Alex has emailed me the URL for where you can read about the proposal and make comments. When I get home tonight, I will forward that out to the people who attended this event. So if you have an interest, you can follow that URL and read what's going on.
Also, there's a charge point that has a petition. Not sent that a while ago.
Okay. ChargePoint is one of the local providers of charge stations. In fact, they're one of the early ones. Wasn't ChargePoint used to be Coolum?
Yes.
Okay. And so they were one of the very early folks in this business. They came and presented to one of the organizations that this speaker series is part of very early on, and we've been very supportive of them. And they're greatly concerned how this will help, how this will impact their viability in the long term. So they have a comment or petition they've sent out, and so I'll forward that in the email as well, so that you can read the position of the people who are in the charge business as well. Then I want to do two things. One, there's another organization who's represented here. I'm going to give them a moment to talk about what they do, and then we'll talk a little about EcoGreen Group. So Wes, if you can come up and talk about the Electrical Automobile Association, which is relevant to the topic we just talked about.
Yeah. So, Electric Auto Association, if you haven't already heard of it, is probably the largest group in electric vehicle owners and enthusiasts that I'm aware of, at least. And we have meetings every month on the third Saturday, 10 to noon at Hewlett Packard's Auditorium, 3000 Hanover Street, Palo Alto. We'll have one next week. But I wanted to mention that this weekend actually, we're having an event at Best Shop Motors, right across the street from Reed Hillview. And there's plenty of charging for those of you who have electric vehicles. We'll be using the Reed Hillview Airport charging stations as well. They have a ton of 120s that were installed a long time ago. But the event will be 10 to 1 on Saturday. And that event is for test driving. And there's supposed to be some really good deals I've heard from the general manager. I know because I personally drive a smart electric. I bought it, but it's I've heard possibilities as low as $100 a month for leasing, which is exceptional.
Yeah.
So,
They also have a Mercedes.
and also, yes, there'll be test drives for both the smart electric drive as well as the Mercedes B-Class, which is a much larger vehicle.
Now, based off the typically Mercedes, you already
It
mentioned,
is better.
they also have now electric cars made by who?
Actually, they own, Gamer owns the smart car company. They started it, what, 1990, I think. So it's been around for a long time, but electric's only been available in the United States, I think, since 2009. It's a small car.
So it's a
not
smart
very-
electric.
Yeah, it's a smart electric, yeah. It's got about a 68 EPA range, but I squeezed 85 out of it, so it's totally possible.
Is that the white one that you have?
Yeah, well, I went out there, you saw it.
Do we park things?
We just bang it around, you were careful with that.
We tried, but.
Okay, no, it's plastic. But they're also, I'm going to speak just for SFW. There's a meeting tomorrow, 6 to 8 p.m. At PlugShare. So if you guys have heard of PlugShare, it's one of the companies that tells you where to get charged from.
On your phone.
Yeah, on your phone or a desktop, and they're having a meeting at their headquarters, Green Cargo's headquarters in San Carlos. That'll be tomorrow evening. So lots of stuff going on. And then the Electric Auto Association will be having a ton of events coming up in April for Earth Day. So you'll probably see us at all of them. I know I'll be there. If you'd like to see electric cars and learn more about them, if you don't already know a lot, come on out. We have lots of events, eaasb.org, eaasb.org/events.
That's all the things will be on that calendar.
Yeah, oh yeah, and on all of our calendars, I've been updated. It's a lot of work.
Thank you so much. And then from our sponsor, EcoGreen Group, I want to give an opportunity to Rod, who's the head of EcoGreen Group. I asked him to say a few words about us and what we do and why you would want to join us. Yeah, so Rod Kirk here. I'm the director of the EcoGreen Group, otherwise known as EGG. You'll see those 3 letters on all of our documentation. We are actually a subsidiary or subgroup of what is called C6 organization. That's a 503c nonprofit organization. And that group is dedicated to helping people find jobs, helping people that are in transition, maybe who want to change from whatever they're doing now to something different or to find a new job. And we are the group that's involved with clean tech, green tech, anything green and clean. Green, clean, and neat. So, and sustainable, the whole thing, smart grids, electric vehicles, new vehicles, everything, the whole wax. We are totally a volunteer organization, so we do rely upon the energy and time of people to help keep the organization living. So if anybody here likes to get involved with those things, I highly encourage you to check us out. We have lots of opportunities for people to get involved. It's a way for you to develop your skills. Let's say if you're in marketing, you can use your marketing skills in our organization. If you're in deep technology design, you can even do some of that work because we do collaborate with other companies
and there's many opportunities to get involved. We have projects that go on where we have various people joining together to do a project. That happens a lot. We have people who have come into our organization and have founded companies and have moved on. So there's just a lot of different ways to get involved in this area. So we have the Thursday morning meetings at the Federated Church in Saratoga. Sometimes we have guest speakers and all kinds of things can happen on Thursday morning. What?
Like next week?
Yes. Talk about that in a minute. And we have these events, one night a month, the speaker series, and also one day we reserve for open networking at a cafe not far from the church. Now, as Alex was saying, we do have a Thursday morning event next week, and it is going to be Carol McClellan from, what's the name of her organization?
Green Career Central?
Green Career Central. She's going to be talking to us about things related to jobs in the green area and how to do a better job of that. Anyway, check it out. We have a blurb on our website which describes what she's going to be talking about, and it should be a pretty good event.
And no cost.
It is free. It's part
Like free.
So with that, I think I've set it up.
Great, thank you very much.
Back over to you.
About to read the bio, and of course, it's disappeared from the screen, so give me just a second to get it back. So I wanted to introduce our speaker, Professor Robert Cormia. First, I'll say a little bit about Robert. His teaching courses here at the college, and he's actually the person who got me interested in this stuff. He recommended to my fiance a film called An Inconvenient Truth, and I went to see it, and it changed how I spend my time and what I'm focused on. So it's wonderful that he's here to talk about this. The other piece is I go to lots of different events to learn about lots of different topics. Some people are focused, they only want to go to solar presentations. I have interest across a broad spectrum of things. And the one person I see more often than anybody else is Robert. And as part of the way I think he's able to do this presentation and sort of piece together how all these pieces fit together, so it should be very interesting. So Robert is an engineering professor at Foothill College, where he teaches nanoscience and clean energy technology. Robert is active in helping to plan Foothill and the college's district's energy strategy, including plans to advance Foothill's microgrid infrastructure to include energy storage, electric vehicles, building analytics, and active power management. His interests include smart energy systems, carbon emission modeling, and climate change, and developing an active and engaged community of energy champions to advance energy efficiency, low carbon choices, and developing a personal climate action plan Olympics. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel.
So I'll just start off by saying something non-controversial. Shouldn't electricity be free? And by the way, I'll put in a bid on that electric vehicle, $100 a month. So thank you for coming tonight. I am an energy champion, and I hope that someday you'll be an energy champion too. Eric was absolutely right. I go to all these presentations, I pick up a little bit from each one, and tonight I'm sharing with you how it's all stitched together. Any discussion of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, energy security, sustainability will always include a mix of opinions about renewable energy, natural gas, or our abundance of coal, right? The potential role of nuclear power, advanced biofuels, and of course the underutilized resource of energy efficiency. With the exception of energy efficiency, these are largely supply-side solutions. Today I'd like to step back a little bit and present a slightly different perspective. As any self-taught practitioner of energy systems, Eric taught me self-teaching, will quickly come to the realization that our problem is simply we have too many people using too much of the wrong kind of energy. And once you come to that realization, it's kind of humbling. And then you can ask a different question, which is, where is the strongest lever arm on this equation, which I will share with you tonight. By the way, I am tenured faculty here at Foothill College. It's required in my contract during any public speaking event. I have to do at least 10 calculations. I do math in public, and if any of you give me a heart problem, I do have my calculator. I will present tonight a couple ideas, more than a couple, on the issue of energy and carbon intensity, because I believe that those two fit together, and that's really where not only our problems are, but where our solutions begin. And an integrated approach to a low carbon, electron-driven, and network energy economy. And our best approach, it really is our best approach for reducing carbon emissions and becoming energy, well, we're looking for energy security, sustainability, and I'll give you a plan that gets us to both. I think that building an electron economy will provide a platform for both energy generation and management. That's what we're trying to do here at Foothill College, and it's going to serve our innovation economy quite well. So here's the best part, and what I'm going to share with you tonight is that we're already doing it. We're already doing virtually all the things that we need to do, but we're not doing it with intention. We're not doing it with clear goals, and we're not doing it with milestones. There are synergies and dependencies between and among the technologies that I'll share with you, which is a 11 plus 1 step plan. But as we put these together, building an electron economy is something that we can do. So let's get started with that. In The Necessary Revolution, did any of you read that or have read Peter Senge? So he introduces this 80-20 challenge and talks about how we're actually going to, Peter introduces this 80-20 challenge about how we're going to reduce carbon emissions to a safe level. And we've got to do it in 20 years, so 80% reduction in 20 years. And then he goes on to say that there's no plausible plan to get there. So what I want to share with you is a plausible plan. It has the pieces, it has the direction, it has the numbers. All it lacks is the will. And a couple of the pieces that it addresses are really energy independence, but not independence from Saudi oil or Russian oil or Canadian oil or any other energy, but independence from carbon. And breaking a hunter-gatherer model where we simply go around and harvest energy wherever it happens to be, and if it's our neighbor's backyard, that's fine too, and or not. And coming up with a couple ideas. So energy equity as an idea of, rather than rent energy and use it in a split second, what if we built an infrastructure where we can own it? This requires a systemic change, and it's a subsystems approach. Again, the good news is that half of you have seen this before. We did it 50 years ago, we can do it again. And then a new electricity model called DGIG, which is something that's been put forward by Clean Coalition, and Craig Lewis simply said, distributed generation and intelligent grid. However you call it, managed grid, managed energy, transforming our energy system from the inside out. All right, so the first thing, again, required by me, because I teach in engineering, I have to show you a graph. So here's some data, right? So it shows 450,000 years of data, 450,000 years of information from ice cores from the Vostok Ice Core, or Vostok Ice Station. It's just a station in Antarctica where it's cold. And they're looking at carbon dioxide levels. They're looking at proxies of temperature from the hydrogen and the oxygen isotopes, and looking at sea level from benefit ice core. And you see a pretty clear-cut correlation. In fact, this is a correlation between temperature, sea level rise, and CO2. It's more than a good correlation. It's a signature of a process. The Earth keeps itself warm for a reason. Why? Because it's alive, we're alive, and it's better to be toasty than freezing, right? So how do we maintain temperature in and out of major ice age cycles? And the answer is through a combination of albedo, ice reflection, water vapor, couple greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and methane. And the Earth has done it for 400 and almost 50,000 years or more until what happened? In the last 250 years, humans took our major conquest, which is what? Fire. We decided, let's just burn everything. We'll burn wood, we'll burn coal, we'll burn gas, What else can we burn? We can burn agri-mass, but if we can burn it, we can get energy from it, and tires, and we're at 400 parts per million carbon dioxide. I'm not here to explain the correlation between these. I have a graduate student working with me who's developing the mathematics behind it. I think it's pretty clear the cause and effect. So we know where that chart is going. Gavin Schmidt, James Hansen, Goddard Space Sciences in the year 2005 did this seminal work where they had 2,000 ocean buoys going up and down through the ocean about 1,000 meters, fairly deep into the water, sensing temperature for a period of 10 years while satellites were looking into the atmosphere, looking at infrared radiation, and determining that there was extra energy in the atmosphere that was ending up in the water, and the water got warm. No surprise there, but they were able to work out the mathematics about how long it takes for water to get warm and the amount of excess energy associated with the amount of greenhouse gases or extra greenhouse gases. And long story short, the planet's getting warmer. It's out of balance. And then we have data from accelerating changes. This is the Arctic sea ice extent up at the North Pole or in the Arctic Circle, which shows the extent of kilometers in ice. This is a projected model going all the way out to 2050. This is the actual. We're losing ice faster. Kind of like when you start losing your hair and you start losing your hair faster, this accelerating change, right? So this accelerating change, do we have any evidence of it? Let's see, heat storms, droughts, storm intensity, fires and durations. What does that sound like? Half of California. Ice quakes. Greenland is having ice quakes, magnitude 4.5 to magnitude 5 ice quakes from ice just breaking off and sliding into the ocean. Methane release, that's my personal favorite. That's the one that keeps me up at night because that is the game changer. Sea ice extent, pH of the ocean. Even if you're not fearful of the ocean and the planet getting warmer, when we change the atmosphere too much with carbon dioxide, it will be too acidic for plankton to make shells to the base of the food chain. They also pump CO2, another bad outcome. Pest migration, we now know that we're getting different pests coming across into California earlier, and sea level rise. All of these things are going on, and it sort of paints a picture of, well, this isn't a pretty picture, is it? So let's not go there. What I want to share with you is, where are we right now? How did we get here? Well, starting out, we can blame it 100,000 years ago. We have humans that conquered fire, and then we conquered wood, and we conquered coal. But what really got us into trouble is economies that are growing, in addition to population. And a couple statistics, and I attended a webinar from BP, which is British Petroleum or Beyond Petroleum, and it wasn't what I expected. I expected them to talk bullish about petroleum, and they didn't talk about that at all. They talked about the size of economies, they talked about population growth going out 25 years, and showing that 3.5% annual growth in an economy, which is bounds for fast economies and slower economies, developing world. I said I do math, 1.035 raised to an exponent of 20 years, 1.99, that's a doubling of our economy in about 20 years, and that's where we expect it to go. BP also showed that energy will grow about 40 to 50%. It's not growing 100% when the economy grows 100%, because energy intensity goes down a little bit, 1.5 to 2% annual growth, and you work that out, there's some exponents, and it'll grow by 40%. Carbon will supply about 60% of that additional 40% of energy, which is what? Fast math, 25%. So carbon emissions will go up 25% over today. Someone might say, that's not bad. The economy grew double and carbon emissions only went up 25%. The problem is we're pushing CO2 levels in the atmosphere between 2.4 part per million per year. And you raise that 25%, you're at 3 parts per million per year. 450 parts per million CO2 is thought to be the same limit by climate scientists as a level that we don't want to go past, because that's 2 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, James Hansen now believes we can't stop at 2, because we're warming at such an accelerated rate. We'll shoot past that with accelerated and amplifying feedbacks, but we go to 3 parts per million. This isn't a sound approach to limiting global warming and climate change. It's simply not a good strategy. And we know all this, but we look at these numbers and we say, bravo to economic growth, bravo to lower energy intensity, carbon emissions, well, it could be worse, but we're not looking at the endpoint and that trajectory. And we kind of need to do that. So where does this all bring us? This equation, if you take only one thing away tonight, it's this fundamental equation, which is the impact, the environmental impact of our carbon-intensive energies is a product of 3 terms: population, that's number of people, that affluence or per capita income of each person, and their energy intensity, what they do with that income, and then third, what is the technology that they use to supply the energy that they're using as they either make their dollars or spend their dollars. That's called IPAC. This is not a difficult equation. It hit me in the middle of the night, or about 11 o'clock at night one night, and I realized, gosh, we'll have 8 billion people fairly soon, and even if we all lowered our carbon intensity to where China was 8 years ago, we'll be producing as much carbon as we don't want to produce next year. So are we doomed? No. We simply have an equation that says if you want to control carbon emissions, you have 2 lever arms, and one is the energy intensity per dollar or per person, and the second is the carbon intensity of the energy that that person uses. Those are the 2 terms. Those are the only 2 that we can control. We can't control population. So that's pretty much off the table. We don't want to control wealth, and we can focus on technology. Where we are today, just to sum all these numbers, $75 trillion GDP divided by 7.5 billion people. I hope you're good with exponents here. $10,000 per person. We're using 525 quadrillion BTUs of energy globally. That's 7,000 BTU per dollar. Now, when you look at that, you're probably wondering, so what are all these numbers? I wanted to come here and hear about electricity. Numbers matter. That number used to be $10,000 per 10,000 BTU per dollar at about the turn of the 21st century. China took off, which is good and bad, producing a lot more economic might, still using a fair amount of carbon, but the rest of the world, the developed world, our energy intensity is coming down. That 7,000 BTU per dollar is an average. It represents about $10,000 per BTU in developing countries and about 5,000 BTU per dollar in countries like the United States and Europe, etc. So some places doing better, some places doing worse, but the key thing that's interesting to me is that energy intensity is not a fixed quantity, and that's why electricity matters. And carbon intensity isn't a fixed quantity either. So let's look at Peter Senge's 80-20 stretch goal and think about this, and I think about this in 2 steps. The first step is we need to get to 2035, which is 20 years out, and reduce greenhouse gases by 80%. Well, here's the good news. I think that humans will reduce greenhouse gases by 80%. Bad news, I don't think we're going to do it by 2035. But if we prepare a good foundation, by 2035, we can take our next step to 2050, which is more of a year ago, which is 1 ton of CO2 per capita. Now, that is a small, small number. If you think that is tough, this is tougher. But if we're going to unpack this into 2 separate problems, can we get to 2035 and reduce in the United States greenhouse gases by 60%? We can do that. We absolutely can do it. We need to reduce petroleum by 75%. I'm going to show you how. We have to eliminate the use of coal. Now, a lot of people in politics say that there is apparently a war on coal in the United States, and I would say, yeah, there's probably a war on coal in the United States, and for good reason. We need to add significant renewables. We're already adding a lot, but we could add them faster. And then by 2050, so if we can prepare a good foundation here and get transportation largely set up, we can go to energy efficient buildings and add renewables. We still have a problem, and that's called baseload energy. So if we replace coal with natural gas. Are we doing better? Absolutely. But are we still burning carbon? Absolutely. So what things can we do? I want to stand here tonight and say that we can re-innovate nuclear power completely. Many of the reactors that we have today were designed and built in 1965. That's 50-year-old technology. And we're going to lease them for another 20 years. That will be 70-year-old technology. Now, I have driven cars that felt like they were really old, but have you ever driven a 70-year-old car? And then think about a 70-year-old nuclear power plant. But what's worse, and Burhan Ibrahim, who was one of our smart energy faculty here and was going to be your April speaker until he did take a job in Colorado, doing very good work. He did his PhD in nuclear research, Syracuse University, graduating in the, I think it was right around the late 70s, and we had 3 Mile Island. And he said, oh my gosh, my career, I've been hit by lightning. But he did not stop in really preaching the fact that we built nuclear power based upon weapons technology. Now, making electricity from a bomb, I think we can do better than that. So if we can go back, revisit actinides, if we can start to think about ways to do this safely, there are technologies that are out there very interesting, and this is all I'm going to say about nuclear technology. Other than getting from 2035 to 2050, we have to get carbon out of the equation. And wind and solar will take us a long way, but they probably won't take us all the way. Yes?
And what is the current carbon per capita? How much carbon is per capita now? If you want to get down to the 10.
So we have 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide, and we have 7.5 billion people. So standing up, I think that answer is somewhere around 5.5 tons per capita. But in California, it's a bigger number. In the United States, it's 20 tons per person. In California, it's 10. In France, it's 10. We can do better. Yeah, we can do a lot better. And there's the second question.
It was the same thing. It was in the same units. What was the per ton usage of carbon?
Yeah.
So basically the same sort of question.
So we're at 40 tons right now, and BP's estimate, which is, I think, fairly accurate. And by the way, they are not bullish on carbon. They will tell you 2 things. We will supply the energy that people need, but we need policy to get in front of this so that we can be told to do the right thing. And it wasn't just one person that said that, it was their entire company. So if you think that all oil companies are like ExxonMobil, take some time and watch their report. So this is, in a single chart, what I'm going to talk about tonight, and it's visioning the electron economy. It's 11 integrated technologies. There's nothing earth-shattering up here. Pieces that come together in terms of generation, distribution, and end use that we're already doing, but we're not doing them in a systematic, integrated way. We're doing it in pieces that we think will work together because we're good at marketing, right? We don't need to be told what to do. Free enterprise will get us where? Exactly where we are today, 40 billion tons of CO2. But if we put our heads to it, free enterprise with a little bit of a trajectory or a vector, will get us in the right area. So renewable energy, yes, wind, solar, geothermal, we're growing it. We could probably grow it 3 times faster. If anyone doubts that, they need to spend 1 minute with Mark Jacobson at Stanford, and he will tell you, in World War II, how many airplanes did we build? And we only have to use half as much steel and aluminum just to get us to where the wind is. And they did it in 5 years or less, 70 years ago, and we're saying we can't do it? I'm upset. Transmission lines to get us that new clean energy to where it needs to be. Smart energy, I have a whole piece out there because I was totally enamored by it, but it's the informatics to, as we were talking earlier tonight, to monitor, model, and manage our energy. We are the internet area. We're not just the internet country. Silicon Valley is the internet area. And if we can't tie internet technology with electricity, we can do this. Microgrids, and I call this managed grids. How do we take, and how many of you parked under our solar panels? Yay, y'all paid to park, right? I don't want to get any nasty cramps about parking tickets. So that solar, that's a megawatt of energy. We produce 45% of the energy that we use on an annual basis. At times we produce 80%. And on Saturdays, we produce 200% of the energy. Huge tides of energy going on. And if we wanted even more photovoltaics, guess what? PG&E is going to say, you can't do that. You're going to push a megawatt into the Loyola substation, And we're not asking you to do that. But if we put up enough energy storage, then we can use it. Then we become integrated demand side management. That's where we want to go. That's where I want this college to go. And that's the legacy that I want to leave here. Electric transportation, we have someone in back that's going to convince me to buy a smart car. I will get one for my birthday. Advanced biofuels, it is absolutely a passive opportunity. My gosh, we're pretty good chemists. We're going to have to make this stuff in volume, but I'm going to show you why that matters. Energy storage for all this extra energy that we're making. Why? Because electricity goes to ground, or not ground, goes to load. And so we need to store it so we can move it around intelligently. Fuel cells, you'll see some pictures of some Bloom Energy fuel cells. How many of you have seen them? So, very good. And they have some out at NASA Ames where you can visit. And then I put down here quantum energy. What is that? That's my duck and cover when I don't say nuclear power. So it's and fusion. There are fusion reactors that will use fast ignition, and guess what their fuel is? All the nuclear mass that's in most of the weapons that we have that's simply rotting until we have to take them apart. So we could actually use that energy for good purpose. And then last, this is a 11+1 program. So we have greenhouse gas sequestration. What is that? Because we're not going to stop carbon emissions soon enough. And somewhere along the line, we're going to have to pull what's out of the air and put it in the ground. A combination of synthetic biology, agriculture, ocean seeding, somewhat unpopular, but maybe we can make a super plankton, and then carbon capture to go with coal. If we're going to have a war on coal, we need to offer them one way out, and that's can they capture it. Yes, ma'am.
Is carbon sequestration still a viable idea? My understanding is that when the power plants looked into it, the cost was prohibitive.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. As of this moment in 2015, I think that people who really wanted to put a knife in this idea have put a knife in this idea. But I don't think that the idea is inherently faulty. I think that people just didn't want it to work. The utilities have looked at it and convinced themselves that it will not make economic sense. It may not even make physical sense. But on this, I have a pretty strong opinion. We should have built the future gen plant with the ARA money. It was only $8 billion. We should have done that a while back. We just ended that project. If we would have done that experiment, we would have answered one question: does this work or does it not? And if it doesn't work, then we got to get rid of coal. So I think in a way, keeping carbon sequestration out there is this life for going forward with coal. But at the same time, just as the Germans were able to take coal and steam and make some very interesting chemistries in World War II, there are probably some ways to use coal in certain ways in certain chemistries going forward. But I would put my long-term effort here and get out of coal as quickly as possible. The issue in getting out of coal in the United States is it's natural gas. And so you are getting rid of one devil, and then you're going with a low carbon devil, but they're still a devil. They may only have two little spikes on their pitchfork. So this
are you going to cover it later? But when does carbon tax fit into all this? If you're going to cover it later, I'll wait.
I'll talk about it later, but I don't have a specific answer on that, other than BP said, give us a price on carbon. And give us a price on carbon so that we'll know the right thing to do. My gosh, that's like having my doctor tell me, I'll pay you to lose weight because you know it's the right thing to do. And I'm thinking through this equation, isn't it just the right thing to do? So, and there's a second question.
Clean coal. I'm sure you read about clean coal. You say eliminate all coal. Does it include also clean coal?
Right, there's no clean coal.
So
carbon is carbon. It's like saying that there's clean methamphetamine. There may be pure, but it will probably kill you faster. But carbon is carbon. Yeah, carbon is carbon. If you're not capturing the CO2, you're venting it to the air. You know from the Vostok data where it's going to take us. By the way, what is the half-life of carbon in the atmosphere? I'll give 10 points extra credit for anyone that gets within an order of magnitude of that.
20,000 years.
260 years.
Too often. Yes?
Yeah, I have heard that China is also doing some carbon
Yeah, so these are good after the talk discussions, but since I'm being live streamed, I'll just say it anyways. Tenure gets you into so much trouble. I think the Chinese are really clever with coal, and if anyone's going to come up with a carbon capture strategy, they can do it, and then they can net the carbon tax for taking the coal off the table. So they can generate energy with coal, and then say, pay us to store it, and now we're good people. And we're taking other people's money to do the right thing. You know, that's kind of a wicked equation, but it's out there, right? Economics, 10,000 years. The answer was 1,000,000 years. The half-life of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 1,000,000 years, and it's got a very long tail. 25% of it will be gone in 50 years, another 25% in 500 years, but it's got a very long tail that will take forever to get out. So that's the danger in burning carbon today, saying that someone else will deal with it. So which gets us to the mighty electron. Atoms don't really look like that, but I thought it was pretty cool. So why are electrons so important? Well, you could say it's the basis of chemistry and chemical bonding, correct? Electrons don't lose energy as heat. So when we're using electric motors, I have to be careful. They're 90% efficient versus if you have an internal combustion engine, you're probably 30 to 35% efficient. Even with really good heat rejection, you might get to 50%, but you're still losing energy as heat. It's the Carnot cycle. It's the way it is. Now, are there ways to use it that are more intelligent, like our cogeneration in our swimming pool, where we're 80% thermally efficient because we capture waste heat, heat the swimming pool with the waste heat, 70% of it, 30% goes to electricity. So that's pretty good. But electrons are interesting because they're efficient and they can come from a wide range of carbon profiles. Fossil fuels, renewable, or nuclear, take your pick. So an electron can come from any of those sources, and I would argue that while ideally a carbon-free economy is where we want to go, we're not going to get there all in one step. But if you can start to harness electrons that are coming from cleaner and cleaner sources, you'll eventually get to where you want to be. The last piece, which is nearly obvious, is that electrons can be networked into circuits. Well, that's, of course, that's circuits. Engineering 37, right? That's to my Foothill College students. Of course they can be networked. That's how they work. But we can also network information. We can network the information about where energy is being used, where it's being generated, where it's existed. We can store it. We have electronic markets to tell us the value of that energy, and we can push it around. So the cool thing about electrons is that they're really neat and they can be tamed, or at least they can be marshaled. So the piece of the electron economy that I wanted to point out, you have 11 subsystems, everything from renewable energy to distributed energy systems, what we have here at Foothill College. We have smart energy, we have advanced metering initiatives. By the way, if you take my clean energy course, I will teach you to become an energy analyst. Energy efficiency, which is very, very important. LEED and green building. LEED is good, green is good. The NASA sustainability base, how many of you have been there? I have students, so about a third of you. I take engineering students there every Friday. So throughout the year, I'll be giving tours still at NASA to see a high performance building. Electric vehicles, of which I'm still not an owner. Alternative fuels, I know, other than petroleum. Batteries and fuel cells, these are all integrated, such as a plan to land a man on the moon in 10 years, which we said we would do in 1963 or by the end of the decade, which we did. That was 5 integrated technologies, of which 80% we hadn't invented yet. We're working in all these areas, and including urban planning, greenhouse gas sequestration, and then the policy of having people who are smart, that know how to use energy better, and who are active. So I just put this little plug for, it's more than just technology, it's smart people helping other people do the right thing. So what are systemic energy principles? About 3.5, 4 years ago, General Electric came up with this cool idea called eco-imagination. Did any of you catch that? So I caught it. It was in July of, I think, 2011. I was writing a National Science Foundation proposal, and I thought, they talk about generation, distribution, and end use. And I don't remember if they said clean generation, smart distribution, and efficient end use. But as a former marketing guy, I said, those are 3 great ideas, and I'm going to write an entire proposal around it. And we turned it into the smart energy system stack. What could make more sense? And there's an electricity value chain that comes from that. So you're gonna right source energy, right timing energy use, and then clean energy circuits. A clean energy circuit is simply a combination of clean generation, smart distribution, and efficient end use, and knowing when, where, and how you've been using energy, and when, where, and how you could be using energy. So my partner in crime, Ali Feruzi, helping me with the proposal, created this nice diagram here of our current energy system, central power systems, and asked, so what could we do better? Large-scale renewables, distributed energy systems like Foothill, smart energy systems to tie it all together, and then advanced transportation, electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, mass transit, and then building energy efficiency, and then the analytics around it. This is a simple block diagram, how energy flows, how information can flow a little bit, how the systems can be integrated, but some terminology, macrogrids, microgrids, or managed energy grids, as what Foothill is, and then a nanogrid. What's a nanogrid? It's a building or a house, right, or a car. So small things that can determine their own energy density or own energy destiny, and buildings within a microgrid here. If someday we will be sub-metered, buildings will be nanogrids. Sustainability base that I'll show you is pretty much a nanogrid. These are the pieces that can come together, and again, it's clean generation, smarter distribution, and efficient end use. So this is our systems model that we overlaid on the 11 steps. And this is just a picture telling you, how does the nanogrid fit into this network? We have nanogrids, we have microgrids that are bigger, so they're quilts in a larger fabric, and then a macrogrid, which is the mother grid. Nothing new under the sun, but a different way of looking at things and nesting your networks. There's a lot of internet communication models that fit into this picture. So now I'm going to break down into the 5 core areas, looking at renewable energy, looking at smart energy, looking at transportation and fuels, looking at storage and conversion, and then looking at buildings. So I want to put some numbers to this, because Peter Senge said there's no credible plan. Well, what does credible mean? Does it mean the numbers add up and people will buy it, or does it mean the numbers are there and no one will do it? But at least is there a plan? So I sit down with my calculator and a spreadsheet, and you put together how much do we need in the United States to get us to 60% carbon reduction. And it turns out 100 gigawatts of utility scale solar. Is that a big number? It's 6 times more than we have now. Now, does that mean that it's a pretty tough goal? You might say, so David says no. You have to realize that 50% of the solar capacity installed in this country is less than 3 years old. And the price of solar is not going up. So if we look at that and say it's a target, how quickly can we do it, or are we going to put it? 100 gigawatts of utility hydroelectric, that's existing, and we pretty much use that up. 200 gigawatts, excuse me, of utility scale wind. How much do we have? We have 67 gigawatts. That's 1/3 of what we need. So we need another 2/3. What's standing in the way of wind? Well, a lot of people that don't want to see wind. Birds. Birds. Well, the bird feeders are a lot less, but there are ways to put there. But the good news is we're 1/3 the way there. And to go another 2/3 is not a huge stretch. I put this parking lot up, or this picture up. Can anyone guess where this is? It's not here, but it's a good guess. This is Fresno State. And I like it because it's just a good looking parking lot. It's got a nice little campus, little turnabout like our roundabout. Maybe it works about the same way. And it probably produces a fair amount of energy. The local population through bonds supports this. And it really brings to the fore that every parking space can be a producer of electricity. And not for charging electric cars per se, but simply for creating an enormous amount of energy. We just have 1/3 of our parking lots covered with solar, and it's 45% of our energy. So clearly, with a little bit more funding and a little bit more design, we could go even further. Concentrating solar power, very, very interesting technology. The price points haven't dropped quite as fast as silicon, but when you look at the ability to concentrate energy, to make electricity, to focus heat, to store it in massive liquid metal I won't call it ponds, but you have liquid metal containers where you can take this heat and keep it really hot. And then at night, when the sun goes down, you can release that heat, put a little bit of natural gas energy in, and boom, it goes from hot to vapor, and you can spin a turbine, so you can have concentrating solar power in the middle of the night. Now that's pretty good.
Is that needed as much if the cost of power at night right now is relatively low compared to more peak times during the day?
That's a very good question, and I think the answer comes down to what is the net balance needed by the utility? What are your other energy needs? With electric vehicles charging in the middle of the night, I think that's really, and if people want a low carbon profile, that's where this makes a lot of sense. But you have to look at generation versus generation and storage, which is, I think, where that makes sense. This is a graph that I put in here a couple years ago, very interesting solar roadmaps that says if we put our heads to it, instead of growing at a slow rate, at a baseline rate, we could go up even faster. Well, thankfully, even though it wasn't appreciated by all the companies that went out of business, the price of solar went down so quickly, we actually had profitability, affordability led profitability. So what does that mean? We can afford to buy all this stuff, but no one can afford to make it. And there's something in that equation that just doesn't make sense unless there's a subsidy. What's wrong with the subsidy if it keeps people doing stuff? So 25% of electricity generated by solar in 2025, we're 25% here at Foothill, and 20% comes from our cogeneration. So we're 45% emission free. Wind power, there's a lot being done with very, very large wind installations up the North Sea, England, UK, in the United States. I think that we could simply do a lot more. Google bought a lot of the old and rusty wind power that's sitting over the top of, and now I can't remember which pass is that? On the way, thank you, on the way to Stockton. So they're going to put in better wind. And a lot of people, not just Google, Apple, are buying into these low emission committed power through power purchase agreements. And it's a way to generate a lot of power for a long time. And it's absolutely 100% emission free. So now the war on coal. Yep, I think we have to eliminate coal. So it's 50% of electricity today. It's been the workhorse of the industrial economy. But you know, our ancestors, cavemen, they were burning things, and we're pretty smart. We burn things too, but I think we can burn things differently. And so maybe it's time to put a sunset on it. It's 40% of total United States carbon emissions, 40%, and it's responsible for 80% of our electricity emissions. We could replace coal with natural gas and wind. So natural gas is good. It's over 50% less carbon emissions than coal if you do two things. So obviously it's got more hydrogen, it's got a ton of hydrogen compared to coal, and you burn it at 60% thermal efficiency. So that's a high efficiency Siemens, General Electric gas turbine, or it's a Bloom fuel cell, but you have to burn it at very, very high efficiency, or do something like the cogeneration that we have here. So it's a good way to do it, but I'll also say that as a chemist, the fact that we're putting these noxious, absolutely horrendously carcinogenic chemicals compressed down into areas of the earth below aquifers also bears a little bit of risk. And I think it bears a little bit of oversight. So the fact that we're getting all this natural gas from fracking, at least in North America, it looks really good today. But if that has a problem, then we have a real big problem, which is why I think base load, you have to look differently. Yes.
You mentioned using solar and cogen here at Foothills.
Yes.
Do you ramp up and down the output of your cogen to balance the solar energy?
No, we don't. And afterwards, I'll pull up a slide that shows how much energy we actually get from cogen. The capstone micro turbines, they're like an engine on an aircraft. You just go to 97%, you just hold it. So our cogen works until we turn it off. Sometimes we'll turn off a pair of turbines in summer if we don't need it, but they don't really ramp at all. Now, that isn't to say that it isn't a good idea. I think it'd be a very good idea, but from what we're told, the bearings will not last as long if we try to cycle that. But investment in modernized nuclear power, as a chemist, I look at this and I just think we're using science that we had 100 years ago to make weapons, to make electricity. And I think if we look at this differently, we might find ways to that we can actually harness this energy, provided that we're behaved adults and don't use it as weapons. It's a pretty big if. So greenhouse gas emissions by source, a chart that you have probably seen, and in case you haven't, over 40% of US emissions are from petroleum. Well, California, while we're really good at having low carbon electricity, we're not so good with petroleum because we just drive everywhere. We drive all the time. And we've got to figure out a way to reduce petroleum, but I'm going to show you how to do that. Other things that are important are the weight that totally carbon emissions from transportation versus industry, residential. Transportation is sitting right out there, that petroleum and that coal. You add those two numbers together, and you realize, gosh, if I got rid of 60% of my petroleum and 60% of my coal, I'd be down 50% in my emissions overnight.
So when we say coal, we talk about coal at a power plant to generate electricity.
Right.
Okay.
So if you were to get rid of 60% of that, fast math, 60% of 42 is 25, 60% or 2/3 of coal, get rid of that, you'd be down another 25, that's 50% overnight. If you were sitting in a company looking for egregious costs and you're doing cost cutting, those two stick out, right? So I put together a little chart. What would carbon intensity of energy look like with a little map that I put together with the solar, the wind, natural gas, and again, I have numbers in the spreadsheet and a calculator and invite you to challenge them as well. Carbon intensity, I am a chemist, so now I have to do a little bit of chemistry in public. Coal is 85% carbon, 15% hydrogen on average. Petroleum, 2/3 carbon, 1/3 hydrogen, and that's on average. And natural gas, which is 50-50 carbon and hydrogen. I want to be careful here. This is the enthalpy, or the heat that you get released when you burn a molecule of methane. So 50% of that natural gas energy comes from a single carbon atom, carbon to CO2, and 50% comes from 4 hydrogens going to 2 water molecules. When you put together a mix that I scripted a little bit earlier, what you get is, and this is a chart showing renewables at 25%, nuclear at 25%, hydrogen sitting at 25%, and carbon at 25%. This is simply natural gas shrunk down to here. So in an electricity future to 2035, where natural gas is supplying about half that energy, it's about you have hydrogen, you have carbon, you have nuclear and renewables, and you bring that carbon intensity pretty far down. These are numbers that are scripted because, again, to Peter Sente's question, is it credible? I just want to put numbers that add up. The energy that we're producing total electrically is 3.6 trillion kilowatt hours a year, which is about 15% less than we're using right now. And I'll show you how we're going to get that energy. But the final mix of all this that you put in here, people say, we can't do that in the United States. We would simply say, you know what, let's go back here. We did this in California. That 25% renewable is hydro, the 25% nuclear is 2+ nuclear reactors, and we have methane supplying half the energy for our electricity. It works in California. There's no reason why it can't work in the United States. It's just a war on coal, right? So this makeup here will add up to about 10 to 15% less than we're using now. And is it enough electricity? Well, that's the interesting question. So how do all these numbers add up? I'm going to take you to transportation. And we look at that awful amount of energy that we're using. United States imports, where we're importing less, but we use about 19 million barrels of oil a day, which is a huge amount for the amount of people that we have. We also have about 1/4 of the cars in the world, but we drive a lot, right? So we're just rationalizing here. We drive cars that get 20 miles per gallon, and we drive cars that get 50 miles per gallon, and some of you drive cars that don't use any gallons. So what if we increased our CAFE from 20, CAFE is combined fuel average for all the cars. What if we increased it from 20 to 50 miles per gallon? Could we do that? Well, absolutely we could do it. And would it be a car that you might not like? Well, if we work on it, it might look kind of nice. But we could decrease our gasoline from 400 million gallons a day in the US to 200 million gallons a day in the US. I'll show you why that's important. That's half the solution, is the efficiency side. The other half is the carbon intensity. We need to increase biofuels, which are 35%, and they're actually agri-fuels because they're ethanol, to about 100 million gallons per day of biofuels, not agri-fuels. Now, someone might ask me, what's the difference between an agri-fuel and a biofuel? That was your question, right?
No.
Oh, come on. The difference is that an agri-fuel is carbon that you could feed to an animal, and a biofuel isn't. So, and it's also, so you're not diverting food from humans, and you're treating the land a little bit differently. And if you're really clever, and I've met some clever people here, you can suck carbon dioxide into the air, you can make plants that can turn into fuel, and the excess carbon goes into a root, into a soil, and doesn't come out. So you have a three-fer in terms of carbon capture, conversion, and long-term storage. Your question was?
Transportation, one of the things that we've heard is the difference between personal transportation versus large, heavy things like trucks and buses and things. Right? Do you talk about the mix between those two? Because it's a lot.
That's a
you
great
save a lot
question.
more by taking
Right.
a 10 mile per gallon vehicle and upping that than the 20 to the 40.
Right. So I think we have to completely rethink how we're doing long-haul shipping. And I did not address that here. It's a very good question. I would do it by rail. I would do it on electric rail and a lot of magnetic levitation so that you're using a lot less energy to push it around. I wouldn't use trucks.
But there's also people like Wrightspeed that are doing stuff in the heavy transportation to convert, garbage trucks and
Absolutely.
short haul.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of gain that can be made in that. When you look at a barrel of fuel that we use, a good portion of that goes into diesel and other things, into kerosene. So reducing petroleum. So could we cut petroleum 2/3 by the year 2030? 2030. It's a 12-step program. So what's the first step in the 12-step program? You know, I am powerless over gasoline. You could also say, you know what, I made a lot of bad decisions and I need a better vision. So I'm just going to make different choices. Can we make a world that is not built around petroleum or less built, and a world that is not built around carbon? So in a couple steps, why would we do that? Well, we're looking at higher gas prices, and I guess they've come down to a lower level, and maybe they'll go back up. But I can't believe that we won't be back here someday. And so in the previous demonstration, and I wanted to do it here, but I set up a smoke alarm. When gas was at $5 and I was doing this talk, I wanted to take a $5 bill and a lighter, and I wanted to burn that $5 bill and ask, what did I just do? I just burned $5. I got another $5 bill, I could do it again. And a whole wallet full. And the point is that when you burn gasoline, it's gone. You don't have much of an investment. So why are we renting energy and burning it like that when we could make it in different ways? So the petroleum reduction numerically says efficiency from 20 miles per gallon to 50 miles per gallon in cars takes your liquid fuels from 400 to 200 million gallons a day. That's easy math. And I've even given it a little bit generous, going from about 25 to 50 miles per gallon, more or less. You cut liquid fuel in half, and then you blend it back. So you cut the petroleum in half, and then you blend it back 50-50. So I did a little thought experiment. When I first heard this by ExxonMobil 5 years ago, I thought it was egregious. They said, we are going to build a low carbon fuel by taking high carbon fuel from Canada, otherwise known as bitumen, and then we're going to mix it with a biofuel, and we're going to call it low carbon. It's like, you're going to dilute poison with water, and it's not poisonous. Well, no, I did the math, and it's kind of interesting. So Canada is a high carbon fuel at 1.25 carbon units. Biofuels, advanced biofuels, are low carbon fuel at 1/4. If you blend them 50-50, you get about 0.75 carbon units. Well, that's a 25% reduction. As it turns out, it's kind of interesting, because if you are cutting your total liquid transportation fuel in half, and then cutting and then blending that with a lower carbon fuel, you come all the way down to a hydrocarbon reduction of 370 to about 150 million gallons per day in carbon equivalent. So you're cutting that back 2/3. But it is 2 steps. It's like diet and exercise. You can't do one or the other. Dave?
What's a carbon unit?
What?
What is a carbon unit?
Oh, carbon unit says, so the carbon unit says relative to, I'll come up with the best answer here. Relative to 20 pounds of CO2 per gallon combusted, what is the total carbon emissions associated with this gallon?
So it's actually not just the carbon in the fuel, it's the carbon that it takes to process the fuel. And that's where Canada gets hit because the bitumen requires natural gas. So you have a higher carbon fuel, and then you blend it with a much lower carbon fuel, and you get 0.75. Now, why is 0.75 carbon units important? Who knows their policy here? That's a low carbon fuel. So you get a tax credit for blending bitumen with a biofuel. Yes.
What's the carbon units from petroleum coming from Russia or Saudi Arabia?
I don't know the answer coming
One
from
use
Russia,
a Canadian one.
but I think because they're a neighbor, there is a reason there. Russia is, I think it's not higher carbon, it's more like North America, but I don't know the other areas. But why this is important is if you're looking at energy security, and this is where my friend Paula knows I've gone through this math, is that if we're to say we don't want to import any oil from someone out of North America, could we do that? Yes, you could do it, and this is your approach. You could do it, and it's a low carbon fuel. And you're bringing in stuff through a pipeline versus railroad cars that tend to tip over and explode and kill people and whatnot. As I said, it is not perfect, but this will get us 2/3 of the way in the two-step program. So transition to biofuels takes us from 2010, a lot of gallons, to fewer gallons. The red is the blend in biofuels. By about 2035, it's 40% biofuel. By 2040, it's about 50-50. It's a lot of effort to get here because making biofuels en masse that is not an agri-fuel is a lot of money. Yes?
Oh, that was my question. Is it easy to make biofuels?
No.
Take energy?
No, it's not easy to make biofuels, and people in biofuels would say 1 million gallons a day is a stretch. And we want to get to 100 million gallons a day.
But also, does it take energy to make it?
It takes it, which is why there's a 25% carbon associated with it. I just factored that in. It's a plug, but it's probably.
So typically it's coming from what, corn or biofuel?
No, these are advanced biofuels that would come from algae and genetically modified organisms. Some that exist and some that don't yet exist.
Would car engines need to be modified to run on the biofuels?
Well, that's the good news. Probably not. Biofuels can come out and they'll make anything you want. These bacteria are so useful. They just want a job. And they'll come out and they'll make readily distillable. So LS9 up in San Francisco used to say it's renewable petroleum. That's a stretch. But it is taking CO2 out of the air, turning it into gas, and then taking it back. This is simply because we have a liquid carbon transportation problem. Afterwards, I'd be happy to take you through some other math. You can get to 50%, 50 miles per gallon CAFE with cars that are still burning gasoline, but over half of them are hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and electric. So it's very interesting. You have electric motors and you have internal combustion motors together, high efficiency, they're all together. And it's simply because you probably can't scale batteries fast enough. But this is just the one of the crutches. So these are looking at biosynthetic fuels, biosynthetic diesel. And yes, electricity would be better, but I think in 20 years, this is our first step. To live without petroleum, this is just some very quick math. When you take the amount of energy that we drive, typically 8 billion miles a day, and convert it to all electrics, we'll all have smart cars, it would be 2.5 billion kilowatt hours a day for electric vehicles.
This 8 billion is trucking plus personal?
This is just personal. So I'm just looking at personal energy right here, and just doing a little interesting fast math. So you might say 2.5 billion kilowatt hours a day, that's a lot. But we use 10 billion kilowatt hours a day in electricity each day going mostly to buildings. Could we be 25% more efficient? And 25% is not a stretch goal. So 25% of 10 is 2.5 billion. Look at that, they're equivalent. So what we are wasting in buildings, if we put in cars, we would need gasoline. This is just a back of the envelope calculation saying that the energy is there. You save it in one place and you use it in another. Plug-in hybrid, now I'm going to go through stuff quickly. This is what I thought I was going to do with my Prius someday, put a bunch of batteries in it, but I probably won't do that. It'll get you there because in any plug-in hybrid car, you'll get typically about 75 miles per gallon over your first 40 miles. So you can just plug it in most of the time, not all the time. Your mileage goes up a lot.
Why won't you do it?
Why won't I do it? That's an after the presentation. Yeah, it has to do with where I get my electricity and the ability of our electric infrastructure where I live to support that much load. But that's an excuse, right? I think the guy in back would say that's an excuse. I know, I'm in 12-step too. This is a real electric vehicle. I have ridden in one. It was the scariest ride of my life. From a Tesla engineer, we went around the campus loop and then we went out on 280, and that was the hard part. We went from the fountain from 0 to 50 miles an hour to 0 to the traffic light. That fast. And I thought, oh my God, this car is scary. A real electric vehicle. This is more my speed. It's small. I like things that are small. And how many people would enjoy something that is small? When was the last time you tried to park a big car in a small parking lot? Okay. Too many cars. This is Los Angeles, California in 2030. That's a 20-lane freeway. Right? But when we're looking at 2 billion cars on the globe, that's what we're looking at, and that's the city that we get. And by the way, when you go to a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or even a hybrid electric vehicle that doesn't idle when it's standing still, what do you do to air pollution? It goes way down. Yeah. There are a lot of benefits. So a colleague of mine from the University of Santa Cruz introduced me to this 5 years ago. He said Skytran, and I said, Robert, this is just Disneyland. I don't believe in this stuff. He says, I know, I was there too, but do the math. And here's the math. These will go up to 150 miles an hour, scalable network, somewhat. Lower maintenance, we don't know that. Under 1,000 pounds, that's probably a given. But energy efficient, they're 50 watt hours per mile. So watt hours is 50 watts for 1 mile. And 50 watt hours per mile, that's what a moped uses, an electric moped. Or one of these with 2 people going 150 miles an hour, and you clip that mile in what, 1/3 of a minute. So when you do the math on these, how about this going to Lake Tahoe? Would you have to stop to put on chains? Would you have to stop behind people changing their tires or accidents? No. So I look at this and simply say, it's a different way to get around. And what's the point of this? Efficiency. And because it's lower in energy, you can pump that electricity in from a lower carbon source. That's a key message tonight, is when you lower your energy intensity, it is much easier to use cleaner energy because you don't have to use as much. Any other question?
Okay, I know that everybody else can probably figure this out, but magnetic levitation is what magnet is, right? So what, if it's magnetic and it's levitation, what really holds it up there? If they're gonna be, that's
it's bolted.
the wheels.
It's bolted, but the faster it goes, it starts to ride up a little bit on the rail.
Like a hovercraft.
Right.
No, there's rails.
Right.
In this car.
Yeah.
Well, I know there are rails, but I mean, it can't just be magnetic.
No, it's a good question.
Stops.
Otherwise, it could just fly off on its own, right?
Yeah.
And you'd be in the side of a barn or something.
So if it has something to hold it up in case,
Right.
and then it kind of rises up off the rails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
BTA out of this throughout the game.
No, but I've heard stories about Mountain Yes.
Is that concept powered by electric distribution to the rail or something?
We have to get electricity to the rail. I don't know the engineering. I don't know the electrical engineering, but Robert Barrett received his PhD at UC Santa Cruz, worked in energy, and he was all over this. And it took me a while, and finally I said, you know what? I said, you're right. This is a way to push people in 100, 200, 300. You could go to LA in 3 hours, but it's the watt hours per mile that you're going to LA. That's 400 miles multiplied by 50, or if you divide 400 by 20, that's 20 kilowatt hours of energy to get from here to Los Angeles. And 20 kilowatt hours of energy is not a lot from a solar source.
So you're saying you can like plug into this?
No, that you can get cleaner energy to this.
No, I mean like when you get in it, you said like 2 people can get in this thing. So
They go in and out of, they come in, they pull off, and you get in, and then they go back into mainstream rail. So they're always going really fast until they pull off on the side and pick up people. So it's kind of interesting. It's a lot of work to get there, but the point is, compared to this or this, remember we're not cavemen anymore. We can think a little bit better. So I don't know if you've ever ridden a solar Segway. I met a guy that went from San Francisco to Santa Cruz on a Segway. It took him 2 days. He had a backpack with 2 fully charged batteries in his backpack, and he only had to stop once for electricity, but he did it in 2 days. Very low power. When you think about people that have to get in a car and go a few miles. Now, admittedly, imagine Castro Street with 1,000 people on it. It would be insane. But imagine trying to drive down those streets with a car. It's just a whole way to move differently, and again, lower energy intensity, and then you've got solar energy that can cover that amount. So efficient buildings, and I'll speed it up a little bit here. Lower energy use, higher efficiency buildings are absolutely essential. And so there's a gentleman in here talking about energy efficiency, and I said, I'm talking about energy intensity. 25% energy efficiency as a betterment is good, but it's not where I want to go. I want to go to 50% less. I want to go to 75%. That's radical energy efficiency. That's rethinking how we develop high performance. It's what NASA does. Why can't we have a building that uses 25,000 BTU per square foot per year instead of 100,000 BTU per square foot per year? I can take you in a building that does that. It's not rocket science. It is an asset. Building integrated photovoltaics, again, lower that energy demand down. You can put on enough on your roof to cover all your energy and a little bit of an electric car. And then the energy management systems that says, when do I get energy to this building? And I'll tap it when I need it. And if I've got some locally, then I can actually give back a little bit at a time. So you have integrated demand response where you're making energy, storing energy, buying energy, and pushing back energy. And it's a beautiful network model. This is NASA's sustainability base. Again, I've taken about half a dozen of you through that. I do that with the engineering club here at Foothill College every Friday afternoon. I know a couple of people have been there. What did my dad say? He said, I didn't even know this building was here. And it's a beautiful building. 50,000 square feet, $500 per square foot. So do the math, $25 million. And you'll say, what's so special about $25 million? The GAO, Government Accounting Office, said to NASA, as you're doing this, you know, if this building works, maybe we could build a bunch of these in California. Well, how many is a bunch? Well, let's just start with 40 a year. That's not huge compared to commercial construction. 40 a year multiplied by $25 million. Who's good with their math? David, that's $1 billion. Is that a good market? That's a great market. That's the size of Tesla. And then you think, is this construction? Let's see. It's design, it's engineering, it's manufacturing, it's maintenance, it's operation. This is really advanced engineering to do this. So this is more than construction. And these are very well-paying jobs. This is a house that has integrated energy on the roof. It has wind for overnight. It has smart appliances. It has energy storage. It's a smart residential building. It's a low carbon building. This is GE's eco-imagination of 3.5 years ago. And you might ask, why isn't every house like this? And do you think that this is an uncomfortable house to live in? Go through sustainability base. When you're in a building like this, it's like, I want to live there. So speed up again, storage and conversion is that we have to start having utility scale storage because we're going to produce a lot of energy from the sun when we don't need it. So we'll store it and use it later. So you have to get energy, not just for transportation batteries, but for storage, down to about 250 watt hours per kilogram. So, excuse me, up to 250 watt hours per kilogram. And then about $100 to $250 per kilowatt hour. Get batteries in this range, and then $5,000 is the only battery that you need in an electric car. $5,000, that's a key price point. And again, what is this? It's an integrated approach. And then on-site storage, fuel cells at 66%, 70%, 75% thermal conversion of natural gas. Your carbon profile on that starts to go way, way down when your efficiency goes way, way up. So you can afford to take natural gas. I'm going to move through this because I think I've discussed it already. Flex natural gas turbines with renewable energy. Batteries are important. They're the weak link in electric vehicle adoption. So they're currently about a third the cost of an electric vehicle. What if it was 10% of the cost? Well, you might say, I like this car. Why doesn't it make any noise? So Bloom Energy fuel cell, they're fun to look at, and I think that their current 60% efficiency is not an intrinsic limit, but they can probably go higher on that. That's why the natural gas conversion is so exciting. This is a gentleman outside of, this is down in,
That's eBay.
okay,
That's
yeah.
eBay.
So they line these up in a row, and they're really amazing. They make a little hum, like they have bees inside them. First off, well, that's the energy, it's coming from bees. But it's really coming from natural gas, and they're fine, and they're clean, and they're fairly stable. They are expensive, but what if we made it our point to make them cheaper? Catching the wind, there's someone here that has worked with someone from Enervault. Where's that gentleman? Okay. So Enervault liquid chemical storage, it's a way to have flow cells instead of batteries. We might entertain having one of these on campus. So you have a lot of wind energy. What do the Norwegians and the British do when they have too much wind energy? Well, just unplug it. Well, you can push water as long as you have water. But if you have to unplug wind from the grid, then it's kind of silly because you can use that emission-free energy at a much later time. The advantage of a flow cell, so it's not huge amounts of power, but it's massive amounts of energy. And this is the Enervault chemistry. This is a plot of battery technology saying, what do you have there? You have a lot of different chemistries, you have a lot of different solutions, and we're not there. But if we were to say, as someone once has, what if we had a feed-in tariff for batteries? Well, that would be kind of interesting. And what if we had price points and performance points that were very, very attractive? And I think we can get there. We certainly have a lot of chemists. So how do we tie this together? Smart energy platform that says you have electric vehicle charging networks that some of you have talked about tonight, building energy management systems that simply mean a building listens to the grid and said, should I buy energy? Should I use energy? Should I give energy back? Do you need power factor corrections? Renewable energy, wind and solar, high performance storage of energy, what ties it together? Smart energy, which is simply smart energy. I talked about this stack earlier. This is simply smart grid in one diagram, flow of energy going from generation to source, flow of information going from source to generation. And then you have a distributed intelligence system that is internet technology asking when, where, and how were we using energy, and when, where, and how do we need to be using energy? How do we match up those two equations? If you don't need much more than 10–15% of your energy stored to really make a difference when you need critical energy. So utilities are facing challenges, integrating, they're more renewable, which is a good thing, integrating electric vehicles, and then integrating new electrical technology. I put it up there because I see innovation. So I think, what are we really good at in the United States? We're pretty good at electrical engineering. We're pretty good at electrical devices, and we can probably be a leader in not energy efficiency, but go beyond that, radical energy efficiency. I'm going to skip over this slide. I'll come to the IntelliGrid. How many of you have seen this from EPRI? It's a crazy diagram. So this is all the different pieces that go into sensing how you use energy, where energy is made, how do we move energy around, how we listen to markets. Do you think we could do anything like that? Then you ask, well, we kind of built the internet, didn't we? And is that more complicated? I mean, how complicated is telecommunications today? Most people could not actually explain how their phone works. So you look at a diagram like this and you think, no, we know how to do this. You just have to accelerate our wiring of it. So for those of you that are into IT and application platforms, how many of you know what an application platform is? At least we've got a couple people. So you plug in disparate applications like logistics, sales, accounting, human resources that may not be able to talk to each other over an operating system. You build the same thing into energy technology, and you have the big players in generation, littler players like us in distributed energy, smart energy managers, you have active distribution, so you have power network nodes, you have a building that's a nanogrid, and you have electric vehicles. And they just plug into an application platform. This is simply a diagram that says, if we know how these things work in IT, wouldn't we build one in energy? And why aren't we working there? So I'm going to skip over this slide and then come back very close to our close. So does this cost money? Of course it does. But if it costs money, it's also a business. And the amount of money to go into solar and wind $1 to $2 trillion, is that a lot of money? So this is where I get really in trouble. And we're live streaming, of course. We spent that in the war, right? And we really didn't get much for it. And we did that in 10 years. So what if we decided, again, a different decision, we'll create another $1 or $2 trillion, and we'll go off and do renewable energy. Could we do this in 10 or 20 years? Absolutely. And $1 trillion for a new power grid, guess what? Half of the grid is nearly 50 years old. It's getting kind of old. I'm over 50, and I know my bone's great. There must be wires out there that are getting a little bit tired. We can replace that. That is generation. It is good business. $2.5 trillion in fuel-saving cars. So these cars will require money, but they're going to save energy along the way. So we're making cars that will use less petroleum. We can use some of those savings to build things that are important and they're economically generating. These aren't money pits. These are things that matter. And then smart energy for an electron economy, melding of the internet and the grid. I think everyone in this room now knows we can do this because we're already doing it. So is this a once in a lifetime opportunity? Folks, we only have 20 years to do this. So I would say this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity. Are there problems? There are definitely problems. There are a lot of people that will say, can't, won't, don't. People don't want this. What's wrong with the carbon we have? Why don't we just stay along this road? It's job killing. Well, I think on the previous slide, that wasn't job killing, that was job making. So there are naysayers, but the problems and challenges come when you let people drift in integrating technology instead of marshaling them and saying, no, we're gonna be there. So you guys, you all have to come together and figure out how you're going to be there. So the synergies, coming back to the main electron economy chart, what do we really need? Work on energy storage, advanced biofuels. If we don't have advanced biofuels, we'll just be sucking less petroleum in 20 years versus sucking a lot less petroleum. We need to blend this back, and it's a way to also take a little bit of carbon out of the atmosphere. Smart energy, high efficiency buildings, they go together really well. Gas turbines, we can do those today. Fuel cells are expensive. If they get cheaper, they're going to make a lot of sense.
RD, what do you call RD?
Renewable energy.
Okay.
Yeah. So firming, so natural gas firming means you have solar and you have wind, but if you run a little bit low, what do? Natural gas firming says you've got enough base load that you're creating this extra energy, some of it's in storage. So firming is your platform, and the renewables are sitting on top taking care of your operational load. Afterwards, I can draw a picture of how sustainability bases operational profile looks.
So firming is different than base load?
A little bit, but sometimes they're the same thing. Yeah, that's a good question. So, really, in close, so is this an Apollo-like program? Yes, there are similarities. So what was Apollo? First and foremost, it was a vision to accomplish something that was really grand, right? On a timeline with milestones, dependent technologies, much of which haven't been developed. And why did we do it? Because we either had to or we wanted to, and it doesn't matter which one. The key is that we made up our mind to do it, and we did it. And it marshaled industries to work together towards a common goal, solve problems with a sense of urgency. And that's what I still don't see in the combination of energy and greenhouse gases. I'm an analyst. I can see this trajectory. I know where it goes. The sense of urgency is we don't want to be at the end of that 20-year time.
The difference is there was Russians involved there. There's no Russians in the Henry.
No, but we have.
That's the urgency.
But we have real demons here.
Oh yeah, but they're not.
The thing about greenhouse gases is that you don't have to invent something bad out there. I showed you those accelerating changes.
It's worse actually than the Russians.
It is much worse. Yes. In one respect, Apollo was easy, right? Why was it easy? Is that we didn't have politically entrenched people saying, oh, we don't want to put something in orbit. We've got better ways to do it. They didn't have lobbyists to not do it, right? And there weren't economic giants like the fossil fuel industry to tell us not to do it. Instead, we turned it around, we said, we're going to do this. But in another sense, it was really hard. Why? Because we had numerous setbacks, problems that we had to master. And at times, we just had that one singular vision to keep us going over the top points. But what I want to come back to is that we're doing all of this already. Everything on that 11 integrated steps we're doing already. We just have to do it with a sense of urgency, with a direction, tying it together. And as I pointed out, with sustainability based, 40 of those buildings is $1 billion industry. That is not job killing. So when you tie all of this together, what does it come down to? I think we can do it. I think that we ought to go do it. And I think the time is ticking. So let's do it. Thank you very much. And then one last shameless plug. I do teach clean energy technology. There's a bunch of handouts in front if you haven't seen it yet. You can be an energy champion. All you have to do is want to save energy, and more importantly, help other people save energy in a demonstrable and sometimes in a pushy way. So my energy champions come into buildings, they turn lights off, they go around, they look for energy leaks, they report hot and cold flows that aren't right. They do it on campus as part of our club, Energy Champions Club, and it's part of the class where you can get 5 units. If the class doesn't sound like something that would fit for you, but it might fit for someone you know, please take a flyer. I'd love to be part of that effort. Right, so where's Eric? So you control the agenda at this point. You have some questions.
Just a question and answer for just a few minutes. We're over time, but
we're over time, but remember, I'm the only one that gets in trouble if we're here late. I have tenure for at least another 3 months.
I will point out one thing as you leave, in case you slip out while people are still talking and asking questions, which is the road you came in on, perimeter loop road, is one way. Make sure you go the same way you came in. So parking lot, 2 or 2A, you're making a right on perimeter, you're going all the way around campus, and you'll end up where you started again. Don't worry, just don't go the wrong way.
And don't speed, and the turn after the firehouse is a little bit on the steep side. Yes?
Fantastic talk, thank you so much. Question, will these slides be made available?
Yes. So about 75% of them are fully annotated, but I will send them to Eric. They're a little bit on the bid side. I may send it to you on a Dropbox, but that's what I wanted to show you. Thank you. That is a Creative Commons license. So what that means is when you have it, it's yours to do whatever you want. Yes.
Where does the government enter into this whole picture? State, local, federal?
All different levels, mostly in policy direction. Government has to stand up and say, you know, there is really a threat out there. It's not the Russians, it's ourselves. And it's all our caveman ancestors that discovered that burning was a good thing. But 250 years ago, we took it to an all new level. And the Vostok ice core data says that if you go on this trajectory, we will take the planet someplace it hasn't been in a million years. But the problem is you're going to do it in 1,000. And you can't accelerate a living system like that quickly and not expect to be damaged. So those are scary. That's what the government can say. A lot of it is people having trust and belief in science to look at these models and say, yeah, this is bad. The addiction to carbon. So when we look at a 12-step problem, 12-step program, you have to say, you know, carbon was my friend for a long time, but I have to do better now. So I'll go with the mighty electron. And for a while, I'll have a crutch. I'll be low carbon. But in 2035, if we think about actinides differently, we'll have a different way to create our base load. Carbon prices are important. Incentives are important. All of that comes together. Yeah. Yes.
Just to point out, there's an interesting company called Home Connect.
Yes.
Which is doing some interesting things in terms of watching some of these signals of the smart grid. And I get emails on my phone that says, hey, we're entering into, you know, really bad territory generation-wise. You can sort of opt into, you know, lowering your consumption at home. Right? You can also start to connect devices into them and give them control to turn it off. And I think, especially with electric cars and all kinds of other things, you know, that's where when you've got over generation, you can take that and store it in cars or grid storage. But when you've got, you know, entering into needing to fire up another power plant, it's much better to take a lot of those optional loads off.
And I'm glad you mentioned them because they were 2 of our sponsors, of our energy champions. They came by, they gave talks, they offered to have some of our students work with them. That and mobile devices and managing your energy. People with mobile devices, if you can look at something and want to manage it, then you'll ask, how do we do it? Then you find out, well, you can't do it from where you are now, then you'll demand better. So to your question about where can government help, a lot of it is this innovation. People want to start managing their energy, and that technology is there. We have also other companies in Palo Alto that are looking for interns, so for our energy champions. Yes.
I do commend you and the Foothill College for having a microgrid. Currently, we do the power generation hundreds of miles away from that consumption, mostly in the Bay Area.
Right.
So if you calculate how much energy is lost between Hetchy and here, there's a huge inefficiency factor. You did not mention a whole lot about that in your presentation.
Hydrogen is so cool too.
So I'm not getting into the details. Transmission line loss isn't quite as bad at that, but congestion is. And there are slides that I'll bolt onto this in different venues that says, what do we have here at Foothill? It is distributed generation. We create power in that parking lot and we use it in 75 buildings out here. Absolutely true. And we need to have energy storage where if we get more photovoltaic, we can store that energy. So I see distributed generation, to your point, which is great. The centralized model was the old model and still will be there, but we can build a power grid from the inside out. And that's local generation, local use, constant management and monitoring. And this is key, partnering with the utility in a managed grid, which is integrated demand side management.
So the follow-up question to that is, you mentioned that Bloom Energy, other fuel cell company, have a 60% efficiency.
Right.
Does that take into account the losses that you would have suffered if you transported it from Hetchy to eBay or to Yahoo?
Well, again, it's only probably 7 to 10% at most in terms of line loss.
So it's actually 67% efficient.
Oh, right. Oh,
So
no.
did you already take that into account? That's the question.
No, I totally agree that when you look at the efficiency of a fuel cell from a distributed generation, it really makes sense because you can carry your base load.
So technically, Bloom can say it's 67% efficient.
In terms of total round trip life cycle analysis, yes.
Compared with
Right.
transporting the energy from
Right.
a central location
Right.
in Hetchy. So,
Right.
or it's really 53% plus they added the 7%. That's what I'm asking.
You can do all kinds of energy economy there. There's different sides of that equation. Hetchy is also water. So the thing is, you could lose energy, but it doesn't.
The 7% is also an average from the
Right.
whole,
Right.
nuclear, and also depends if it's 500 miles
It
or
could be 500 miles.
700,
Right.
200 miles. So
Right, and that's why utility scale energy storage matters. It really matters. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, is the California, they do nuclear energy? I thought there was a ban on nuclear.
I'm sorry, which country?
California.
There's one plant left, yeah, they're paying now.
We don't do it anymore.
I don't have an answer to that. That's a good question because I don't have an answer to it. But I think that what we're looking at is a lull in nuclear technology because we haven't put our smarter thinking caps on. And if we look at the amount of energy that we have stored in weapons and we look at fusion energy someday, I'm thinking the long haul. I'm thinking 2050, I'm thinking 2100. And there have got to be humans that will look back at us and say, why are you guys making power from bombs? And you were burning coal, venting it to the atmosphere, and you were driving around in cars that idled when they weren't moving. You really weren't on the ball. But then you made a decision that you were going to think better. And, doing better starts with thinking better.
We had avoided cost electrical contracts back in the 70s.
Right.
And then we had the partial deregulation of utilities. And so, are we in a better position today, or worse position today to have the government encourage the reduction of carbon emissions?
I don't know how I can parse the two halves of that question. The government certainly can encourage a reduction in carbon emissions, and I think that the EPA ruling on carbon dioxide is a pollutant, even though it's worse than a pollutant because it manages the temperature of the planet. So when you meddle with that system, it's worse than polluting because you can't clean it up. But I'll just parse that separately. I don't think that the government would want to enter into the utility business other than where I see a problem is in California, the CPUC gives the rules to the utilities to how they do business. Utilities want to do better, but they can't because the CPUC isn't helping them. And they're not thinking aggressively as to, or not aggressively, but just in a huge innovative way of, the DG is coming. How do we become this next grid? Let's look at where it is in steps. What are the business rules that make sense along the way? And let's do it. And the population has to get behind it. And maybe electricity gets it a little bit expensive, more expensive for a while. But down the road, when you build these large-scale infrastructure projects, then you're in a better place. And that's just my thinking on the cost of energy. And I will say the avoided cost, what is the avoided cost of storms? I'm not sure that we can avoid every storm that is out there, but we've been hit with some very, very large destructive storms in the United States. And I think that one of the things San Mateo County is looking at is, what does the seawall look like for 2050? So the seawall, when we could be looking at 20 inches of sea level rise. And what does that storm surge look like? What are those avoided costs? And I think when you put that all together, you realize, yeah, we're in a bad place now. Sea level rise will be disastrous, but methane release from the Arctic will be catastrophic. And you think about, what if we lose a ton of agriculture? We're down to what, 5% snowpack? We have an inch of snow. Boston got 100 times more snow than us. Well, that's one of the impacts of what we're facing right now. And if we think about what is California with its water 20 years out, how about 20 months out?
Yeah.
So I keep all these costs and I just think, here's a way that can create jobs. And as Erica would say, let's just not burn carbon, right? Why not just use renewables? We don't have to be cavemen. They were good. They had their time. But burning things, if you're going to burn things, you really have to think about where do those emissions go and have checks and balances. Can I ever pull that out of the atmosphere? That kind of impact.
Let's make this the last question.
Yes.
Okay, you mentioned briefly the nuclear thing with the what's that stuff called? Thorium, yeah. Apparently, there's no way to make nuclear weapons out of thorium, and you can actually burn up the stuff that they're trying to bury in the ground, the nuclear waste from the uranium reactors. You can actually consume some of that thorium and eventually burn it all off without all this half-life. It's got a very, very short half-life, but it's got a built-in safety feature, so if something goes wrong, it actually will shut itself down.
Right, and I think that comes down to what is the scientific literacy of the public, and that's not to denigrate. Is that these are difficult questions. Nuclear, we use it for bombs. You can have it for waste, and terrorists can get it, and then it's really bad. Versus, let's go back to look at how the universe really works at this level. Let's rethink what we have, and then can we do things? And to bless his heart, Bill Gates has been trying for almost 10 years now, investing money in China, trying to get anyone to take the traveling way of nuclear reaction, which is still hypothetical, and ask, if I throw money at it, will it work? Can we at least do this experiment? So
Good news is the Chinese are trying to figure out if they're going to go.
they're all over it. Yes, they're extremely innovative, and they think like Apollo. It's like, this is where we're going to be in 20 years, so let's get to it. And I think there's a strong message there.
But it's
So
still
maybe,
hazardous.
right.
You can build a 30 bomb out of it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you blow it up into
So I want to thank all of you for coming to Foothill College. This is your first time. And I hope none of you got parking tickets. And I hope to see you again. And whether or not they enroll in the course, anyone can be an energy champion. The course will run on Tuesday nights in a hybrid lecture, which means it's a casual lecture. We have activities outside of class. If the course isn't right for you, maybe it's right for someone else.
How do we get into your Friday afternoon?
Send me an email. I'll collect some names up there.